All right, so it is 6:40. Break over. Um, I apologize if there were any strange noises around during that meditation. I'm in an unfamiliar place, and there's kids that started playing. This usually happens when you're doing a meditation. Kids start playing, and then people start putting groceries away, and there's all these noises that happen. So I apologize if that was disruptive. Again, it's such a pleasure being here with you, and just like to offer some Dharma thoughts and then have a Q&A afterwards. Yeah, and so the theme of this is the path to peace, awakening to our lives in the midst of this, of this. Yeah. What is this? One of the things that I like that the Buddha pointed out is that life is really, really hard. It's not an easy thing. Life is dukkha, as the suttas say. And so it's really difficult to be a human. And if we're really honest with ourselves, none of us really know what's going on in this life. We just sort of show up one day, as babies. We become conscious at some point. We find ourselves in the middle of this thing. And some people tell us what to do for a while. And then we're unleashed on the world, and then eventually we kind of figure out that everything is made up. Money is made up. The government is made up. Power structures are made up. Taxes are made up. There's particular things that we have to kind of, play along with in this world, but none of it's really real. And again, none of us really know what's going on if we're honest. But luckily, as practitioners, we have a map for us. We have a way to put life into context, and that's the real gift of the Buddha. And really, any philosophy that we undertake, any spiritual path that we undertake, is just that. It's an attempt to make sense out of life, and to make life perhaps a little bit easier, or to perhaps draw our attention and to aim our heart at something that's more true and more real than just this life. And for us as practitioners, this path is the Dhamma, or the Dharma. Same word. Dhamma is Pali, Dharma is Sanskrit, as I'm sure you already know. And the Dhamma is described in various different ways by the Buddha. Throughout the suttas, various words that I really like sanditiko, the Pali word, means it is here. The Dharma is here. It is now. The Dharma is always present. Another word, akaliko. Akaliko, it's timeless. Meaning that it's always relevant. It doesn't go out of style. It's beyond time. It transcends time. It's not bound by time. It's timeless. It's ehipassiko. Ehipassiko. It naturally invites investigation. It draws us in. We turn our attention to it, or we turn our hearts toward it, and it pulls us in. It invites us to investigate it. Opanaiko, another word. It's inward leading. It naturally leads to the source, to the truth, to the indestructible, it's sometimes called. And so from these words, from this context here, from what the suttas say, the Dharma is a very natural thing. It's a very natural way of being. A very old definition of Dharma is just nature, natural law, the natural law. And I often like to think of the Buddha as a naturalist. I think of the old ancient Taoist sages, if you're familiar with Taoism, or even many indigenous traditions. The entire philosophy is built around observation, observing what's happening in the natural world, observing how nature works, and then modeling our lives around those principles of what we observe. And so the Buddha, to me, follows that same path. He's a naturalist, as opposed to what we could call an engineer. And so the difference is an engineer attempts to manipulate reality to create something, to create a particular result. So I manipulate these elements and create this thing. A naturalist tries to disappear, tries to observe, allowing natural processes to unfold in front of their eyes. And the intention here is to understand, is to learn, not to manipulate, but to see clearly, the patterns, the laws, the ways of nature. And for much of my spiritual practice, for many, many years, I was definitely an engineer. I was doing particular things to create a particular result. I tried to manipulate and force something I would call wrong effort, as opposed to the right effort of the Buddha. And the Buddha did this as well. He went out into the forest and studied with various teachers, attempting to manipulate reality to create an end to suffering. And the Buddha achieved extremely advanced, refined states of awareness and consciousness through various austerities, through torturing his body, through very specific and rigorous techniques. He did all of these things for many, many years, and he recognized that there was still suffering. And we see this everywhere. People attempting to engineer their way out of suffering, seeking happiness and impermanent things and people, which isn't the way of nature. And so in this meditation we just did, noticing the arising and the falling, that's the way of nature. Impermanence, coming and going. And sometimes as spiritual practitioners, me being the primary example here, we can get caught up in an aesthetic or a technique or a teacher and cling to that teacher. And so we sort of put we lay our narcissism or our attempts to create solidity onto our spiritual practice. And we can even create suffering through our practice, which is really an interesting thing. when we try to concretize our practice or concretize reality, a reality. Chogyam Trungpa called this spiritual materialism, at least one aspect of spiritual materialism. And so though we, in Buddhist practice, we use various techniques, yeah, but if we cling to them, we actually begin to create another cycle of suffering. If we cling to a particular technique, if we cling to a particular teaching, if we cling to a particular dharma, then we create more suffering. This reminds me of the Buddha talking about the raft. You use the raft to cross the river, but once you cross the river, you don't keep carrying the raft. You leave it there. You use the practice to get over a particular hump or across a particular river, and then you no longer need it anymore. And to carry it around is just to create more baggage, create more suffering. The real intention of Buddhist practice, and this mirrors the natural law of impermanence, is always letting go, continuously letting go, to observe, to relax more. And this is what the Buddha eventually did under the Bodhi tree. This is how he conquered suffering. He sat and he watched his own mind with the intention of learning the mind's natural inclinations. And this is why I talk about the Buddha as a naturalist, because he observed his own mind, the natural patterns of the mind, what the human mind's tendencies are. Yeah. And he saw this clinging, this concretization, this cycle of suffering that can take many forms, and in the form of that he was coming out of was these spiritual austerities that were really not good for his body. And I love what brought him out of it too, the story of the rose apple tree. He had this memory of being a kid at a harvest festival, watching the festival, or watching the plowing festival. I'm not sure exactly what it was, some type of village ritual. And he was underneath this rose apple tree and he was watching, observing, and he felt this deep sense of peace where there was no clinging, where there wasn't anything in particular that was creating happiness. It was through the act of relaxing, through watching, through observing, completely content. There wasn't a particular thing that it was clinging. There was no clinging. There was nothing. And he remembered this, and he took this to the Bodhi tree. From the rose apple tree to the Bodhi tree. And what he saw was this cycle of clinging, creating this cycle of suffering. And he became really intimate with this awareness, or this knowing of the mechanism that creates the suffering. And this mechanism is a natural one as well, but it isn't always conducive to a life that is free from suffering. What he saw was that the human mind is a mechanism of pattern creation. And that it's constantly influenced by conditions. And sometimes the mind even engineers its own conditions as well. And these patterns can be created consciously or more often unconsciously. And we could think of the path of Dhamma as one of skillful pattern creation, or of creating conditions that nurture a life that we want to live. And so we are pattern creating machines, this mind of ours. And we run on patterns, which serves us very well in some ways. But sometimes we're running that same pattern for years and years and years, going all the way back to childhood, that create particular reactions and results. And we run that program over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And this is the Pali word for this is a sankhara. Sankara. And my favorite translation of Sankara is by Ajahn Suchito, calls it a program. Like we're running a program, like a computer runs a program. And we're inputted with various programs throughout our life, good and bad. And one of our objectives, perhaps our main objective in this life as practitioners, is to sit and observe, creating or bringing the unconscious into the conscious, noticing these patterns and dismantling them, replacing them with skillful action in the moment. And so we can think of Dhamma again as skillful pattern creation. We can also think of the Dhamma path as an act of shedding or of cutting away, of freeing ourselves from these unnecessary burdens, these unnecessary conditions, these unnecessary patterns. I like to think of reptiles shedding their skin, or trees dropping their leaves. They do this every, I don't know how many times a year. It's trees once a year. I'm not sure how often snakes and lizards shed their skin, but at least once a year. And so nature is constantly remaking itself. It's constantly shedding. Our body is constantly shedding. This liver that we have is not the same liver we had a year ago. The body's constantly remaking itself. Nature's constantly remaking itself. But somehow we can be under this delusion that we can have solidity or concretize life. So we can have these patterns, these tendencies, these things, these rafts that we carry around that weigh us down. The expectations from the past or the expectations for the future that are based on the past, memories, conditioning that's just not useful anymore. And we know it, we can feel it, we see it. Or just nonsense thinking. Have you ever noticed that? Just how the mind keeps moving all the time, this monologue, this dialogue constantly going on, and it's mostly just nonsense. It's just worthless stuff. I often will laugh at myself at how ridiculous my mind is sometimes. The stories it creates, the spins, the stories it weaves. And what's really funny is I actually believe them. A lot of the times I actually believe these stories. And they influence our lives. And not only influence our lives, they influence the lives around us, the people that we interact with. You take a step back, it's pretty ridiculous if we look at it. But I do appreciate the creativity sometimes. It can be really interesting. I'm amazed sometimes at the stories that my mind comes up with. So like the Buddha, we sit and we observe. We just observe. We relax. We look. We understand that this Dhamma, this Dharma is natural to us. It's not something that we have to go get. It's not outside of ourselves. It's not something we have to achieve. It's not something that we have to gain. In fact, that's actually moving in the wrong direction. It's something that's already here. It's present. It's all of these things. The Dhamma is sanditiko. It is here, it's now, it's always present. It's akaliko, it's timeless. It's ehipassiko, it's inviting investigation. It's opanayiko, it's leading inward to the source. Yeah, one of my favorite suttas is in the Samyutta Nikaya, which is the connected discourses. And the sutta is called the City, the City. And this is embedded in what is called the Book of Causation, where the Buddha is discussing this mechanism of the mind that creates suffering or non-suffering. And if you want to know more about that mechanism, you can listen to last week's Dharma talk, because there was a really beautiful Dharma talk on this mechanism. So the Buddha understands clearly that conditions create. And we are constantly conditioning our lives. And in this very moment, right now, in this moment, I'm conditioning my future. Right now, the choices I make right now, the words I choose, the actions that I choose, all of these things are conditioning my future. So I'm constantly conditioning. And so if I'm constantly replaying patterns from my past, then my future is being conditioned on the past. So it's this constant cycle, this cycle over and over again, spinning wheel of samsara over and over again. So becoming consciousness of this is really the whole point of practice, of discovering the rising and falling of phenomena, these mechanisms, and letting go of them. Certain conditions give rise to certain things. And so this sutta, I'll eventually get to it. This is part of the way down. It starts to explain this mechanism of pattern creation and the cycle of suffering. And the Buddha says this, it says, in the same way, I saw an ancient path, an ancient road, traveled by the rightly self-awakened ones of former times. And what is this? What is that ancient path? Oh wait, hang on, I started it too late. Hang on, I have it here. Pardon me. Bear with me. Here we go. It says, it is as if, after explaining this mechanism, it is just as if a man or woman or whatever, these suttas are sometimes translated very patriarchically, so don't mind the gender pronouns here. It is just as if a man traveling along a wilderness track were to see an ancient path, an ancient road, traveled by people of former times. He would follow it. Following it, he would see an ancient city, an ancient capital inhabited by people of former times, complete with parks, groves, and ponds, walled and delightful. He would go to address the king or the king's minister, saying, "Sire, you should know that while traveling along a wilderness track, I saw an ancient path. I followed it. I saw an ancient city, an ancient capital, complete with parks, groves, and ponds, walled, delightful. Sire, rebuild that city." The king or king's minister would rebuild that city so that at a later date, the city would become powerful, rich, and well-populated, fully grown and prosperous. In the same way, I saw an ancient path, an ancient road traveled by the rightly self-awakened ones of former times. And what is that ancient path, that ancient road traveled by the rightly self-awakened ones of former times? Just this noble eightfold path right view, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. That is the ancient path, the ancient road, traveled by the rightly self-awakened ones of former times. I followed that path. Following it, I came to direct knowledge of aging and death, direct knowledge of the origination of aging and death, direct knowledge of the cessation of aging and death, etc., etc. It's really beautiful. I find it really, really beautiful because the Buddha is saying here that this isn't something that he created. This is something that was natural. This is something that he discovered that was already there. It's a path that's been traveled by many, many, many that came before him. This king, this queen, this royalty that he's referring to, that royalty is us. That's who he's pointing to. Yeah. He's the traveler that discovered the ancient city. And he's pointing to us saying, this ancient city's here, rebuild it. This is here. The Dhamma is natural. It just has to be uncovered. We have to recognize these patterns, this overgrowth, these conditions that either were created by us or some other person from our lives. The Buddha said throughout the suttas that he only discovered this. He didn't create it. It's an ancient road that is sanditiko. It is here, it is now, it's always present, and it's discoverable by us. We renovate our city and then we share it with others. And so the Dhamma is natural. It is nature. And I find this really moving. This really beautiful. It's like this, the Buddha has confidence in me to be able to do what he did. The Buddha has confidence in all of us here to be able to do what he did, because it's natural to each one of us. He's not special. And he would say the same thing, probably. Yeah, I find that really, really moving. That he could have just discovered his city and went back into the jungle. In fact, I think that was his first inclination, was like, they'll never understand this. I'm going to go into the jungle and live out the rest of my days in this realization. But he was charged with doing this. And through his compassion, he decided to go out and teach for 40 years. And so it's this beautiful gift that he's pointing out for us. And it's empowering because he's saying we can all do this. This is also a really beautiful way to understand the middle way, this sutta. It's like in the middle of all of this mess, in the middle of all of this overgrowth, can I see past the pain? Can I see past the hurt? Can I see past the excess? Can I see the Dhamma underneath that? Can I see that everything is just as it is? In order to create peace, we have to be fully who and where we are. Because the Dhamma, as has been told here, isn't somewhere else. It's not out there. It's not in the future. It's not in some temple on the top of a mountain. It's right here, right now. This is Ajahn Chah. Peace is within oneself, to be found in the same place as agitation and suffering. It is not found in a forest or on a hilltop, nor is it given by a teacher. Where you experience suffering, you can also find freedom from suffering. Trying to run away from suffering is actually to run toward it. And so this path to peace is something I like to call radical okayness. Radical okayness. It's an acceptance of things being as they are right now, fully accepting how things are right now is the only place we can start. Do I choose to resist the circumstances and events and the thoughts that arise, or do I make peace with them? Do I understand where they're coming from? Do I understand the mechanism, the conditions by which they arise? This doesn't mean that I don't take action when necessary, or that we don't do anything when there's something that we can do to help end a being's suffering. But we do all of these things. We enter into compassion with a mind that lets go, as Ajahn Chah said. And this mind that lets go acknowledges this rising and falling. It acknowledges, it lives out of, it's an expression of the impermanence. It's an expression of the natural law. It's an expression of the Dhamma. And I'll end this with another Ajahn Chah quote, classic quote. You've probably heard it before, but it's always potent. Do everything, do everything, do everything with a mind that lets go. Don't accept praise or gain or anything else. If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace. Your struggle with the world will come to an end. Let's just pause here for a moment. Thank you for listening. I hope that there was something useful in there. Yeah, and so open this up for a Q&A if anybody has any Q's. I might have some A's for you. I can't guarantee that, but I'll do my best.
All right.
I never fail to form new questions. I'm Merle. I've never met you, Adam. I like to talk a lot. I'm kind of new to the practice, and I find that how do you take it back into the world, and how do you take it back into the family? Like I always, for me, I would say Ram Dass and Thich Nhat Hanh were my first kind of like visual, lectures and experiences online where I would watch, their lead. And Ram Dass, of course, was always kind of more mischievous. And then Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, he was always like, I mean, he would have a little bit of play, but he really was concentrated. And So, the path is recent, and like I followed them for years and like, listened to Ram Dass for years. The path is recent where I'm practicing. And so you go, I have 3 daughters. I have, old friends, and like, how do you go back into society and try not to get, like, it's like very year, like I'll say about a year and a half now, not get like all caught up in like the way they expect you to used to have been, and the dialogues and and like it seems so complicated, where like it just kind of happened today to me. There was like kind of too many old friends around me. And then I was back, and one of my friends wanted to read this old Instagram person that talked to me 3 years ago. And I was reading it, and then I'm thinking to myself, like, this is just like poison. I don't even want to read this, right? But then I gave in. But anyway, so it's just like thinking about like, we're trying to change these patterns. That's what you're talking about. Like, and I have some really, like, all of us in these ingrained patterns that put me in a really, hard state the last couple of years. And like, and some, well, in some ways, reading what I did read, I saw how compassionate I was to this person who was starting to abuse me online on Instagram, how compassionate, even then before I was practicing, like how I was like, look, I'm just out here for the greater good. But anyways, so I read all this stuff, and like, and then we're like talking about it, and then like this and that. I was like, it's so in the past, right? Like, why am I even indulging in that? I mean, I guess it's nice to see that I was always compassionate. Yeah. I don't know, it's just like kind of how to like change the patterns. And then these other people, your family and all this people want you, they're like, there's all these hooks,
Mm. Yeah, that's the question, right? But you're already doing it. So I would give yourself some credit. You noticed when the person showed you the Instagram thing, you noticed the pattern. And so the first thing is you just notice. And the more you notice, that's how the patterns change. The insidiousness of the patterns is when they're not conscious. And so maybe a year ago, you would have just done that and you wouldn't have noticed, but now it's starting to happen. Our patterns may change, our behaviors may change, but we can never have the expectation that other people's are going to change. That's a recipe for disaster and a lot of suffering. So I would just keep noticing. That's all you can do. You can't change others. And maybe, next time, the friend wants to show you the Instagram post or something else, you just say, I would rather not. That's just not something that's I find nourishing for myself anymore. Or something. And so you start to change, you start to do things differently. And other people may come along. We can't have that expectation. But what I found is when I began to change, new friends showed up, new things happened, new circles were created. And then I could go in, and the more I practiced, I could go into my spaces with old people in my life. And I was different, and they knew that. And so they eventually they don't engage me in that same way anymore. So it just takes a lot of time. It just takes a lot of practice. It just takes a lot of just awareness. The most important thing is that you just keep aware, keep being aware, keep your mindfulness with you. We practice and we continue the practice throughout the day, and just noticing. You're noticing, even if you give in, you're noticing that you're giving in. And it doesn't feel so great, and you don't want to feel that. You don't want to feel that next time, and so you don't do it next time. There are ways to do it, but the most important thing is just to remain diligent in your mindfulness. Yeah.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure on timing here. I know that there's something other stuff that's supposed to happen, but maybe one more question. Yeah, if there is one.
I have a question. I'm Robin, and my question is, this knowledge it's so great, but through your practice, how have you noticed when you're in the depths, as you mentioned, I think in the meditation or maybe the beginning of the talk, the stories, the creativity that the mind makes up that we get wrapped up and taken along with. And especially in these times where the media lets us know all the dire things that are happening all at once everywhere. And maybe if we're dealing with personal things and everything feels like kind of hopeless and we don't have energy, how do you see that your practice helps when things are really bad?
Hmm. Hmm. For me in my practice, it's through this understanding of my own mind, I begin to understand the minds of others, and then the manifestation of that mind in society. So I see the cycles of suffering. I see what's skillful to participate in and what's not skillful to participate in. And I don't know if this is getting to what you're asking, but we begin to, my most profound, or one of the many profound paths, but is the path of compassion, is in understanding, is in seeing what's happening and noticing that people can get caught in patterns, and it can result in a lot of sadness. And that's one of the challenges about mindfulness practice, is just feeling what's here, feeling the sadness, feeling the compassion, feeling the there's a lot of things to be sad about right now, and most of them are the manifestations of minds that are seeking answers, seeking happiness, seeking solidity, seeking concretization, seeking safety. And I think once we understand that, we can begin to have compassion. And doesn't mean it goes away, but we learn to work with it and change our relationship with particular things. But sometimes it's just sad, and you just have to be sad, and you have to feel it fully. And that can be very liberative, in my experience. To not fight it, but to allow it, because the fighting of it is like a denial of what's actually here, and then it will only dissipate by fully embracing it.
Thank you for that
So
reminder.
that's helpful.
It's very easy to forget
I
and
just,
want to push away the negativity.
It's hard out there. Life's hard. Dukkha's
I
everywhere.
just want to say that Mountain Stream really helped me with that, and Robin and Marcia and all of them really helped me with that last year. And I just would sit with that pain when I ran from it for years. And so I really like what you said, like, because today my friend left and I didn't want her to leave. And anyway, so I thought, well, he's so right. You just keep doing it. And then it dissipates it instead of running for, like, I don't know how many years.
Yeah. All right, so how about we do just a little metta practice now, and then we'll have some announcements. Very quick metta. And so remembering towards the initial meditation that we did, kind of at the end, where we're feeling out into space. Feel out into the front of you, out into the space in front of you. And just fill that space with a sense of kindness and love, acceptance. May all beings be free from suffering and the conditions of suffering. And then feeling into the space to the right, filling that space with kindness, love. The Buddha talks about this as radiating kindness as far as you want to go. Maybe it just stays really close because you need it. Feeling into this space out to the left, filling it with kindness, compassion. And the space behind you, radiating kindness, love. Above and below. And in all directions. Dedicate the merit of our practice to the benefit of all beings. May our practice ripple out in all directions. Our family, our friends, all people, all beings, may they be affected. And may all beings in all directions be free from suffering and the causes and conditions of suffering. Thank you all so very, very much. Appreciate you being here. I appreciate your questions, and it's really been lovely. Again, thank you to Marcia and John and Robin and the whole Mountain Stream community. It's really a beautiful thing you got going there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Yeah.
Good evening, Sangha. My name is Jen Scott. I wanted to offer a few top note announcements. Mountain Stream's doing a lot of things. And if your brain is going right and left and forward and backward in beautiful radical okayness, just know that our website, mtstream.org, can help orient you with some of the details, or actually lots of the details regarding programs and events coming up. I would like to mention tomorrow night, live Tuesday evening, the program Sitting in Sangha continues, peer led with Marcia Craighead, Paul Steege, and Kate Coughlin. 6:30, everyone convenes for a quiet sit and then a council style sharing related to a Dharma prompt. On Thursday evening, there are two events going on. One is on Zoom. Feel free to join Tony Bernhard as he takes the one seat at 6 p.m. or come to Mountain Stream live for a mindful movement class with Tracy Lease at 6 p.m. She's calling this Flow Towards Inner Stillness. This weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, there are big things going on at Mountain Stream. So if you're local, please consider joining in. Friday, our temple is open from 11:30 to 1:30, and Ken Bradford will be supporting a Dharma discussion starting at noon. And then we'll move into a quiet sit at 12:30, and we say our goodbyes at 1:30. Saturday, it is time for the mindful and engaging practice called Temple Care. We have a welcome circle at 10 a.m. And then we transition at noon for a quiet sit from noon to 12:30. I know some people on this call are already signed up. Thank you so much. And Sunday is our community picnic potluck. We're inviting people to come from 4 to 7, and please do read the details on the website so you are prepared to share and participate with the vision that the community building team has created. Everyone is welcome. Next Monday, August 24th, Dennis Warren will be our teacher. This is a Zoom offering. And plan ahead for a day long with Dennis Warren live only on Sunday, August 13th. And the title of that is Living on the Other Side of Suffering. As Adam was just saying, we are creating our future with skillful decisions and mindful choices in these very moments. And with that being said, we are co-creating this Buddhist collective. Mountain Stream is this marvelous manifestation of such beautiful hearts. And to that end, we have a dana practice of living generously to support the teachers who support us. So if you are in a position to support Adam Stonebreaker this evening, again, Adam, thank you so much. Please follow information on the chat function down below in this lived experience of interconnectedness, even on the Zoom machine. Thank you all so much for being Sangha. Thank you for your presence and your practice. And feel free to unmute and say good evening and see you.
Can I butt in real quick?
Oh, of course.
I forgot to mention, I meant to mention earlier that unrelated to Mountain Stream, sort of kind of related, John Travis and I are teaching a retreat in Thailand over New Year's from December 29th to January 8th. And it's called Living with an Open Heart, and it's about the 4 Brahma Viharas. And it should be a wonderful time. Actually, one of the teachers I'm teaching with here in Big Bear has taught here at this center that we're teaching at. And she said it's the most beautiful, wonderful, perfect place she's ever taught. So that's a pretty good endorsement. So I just wanted to throw that in there because I forgot to do it earlier.
So Adam, if people want more information, can you just give a little prompt of how they would get that? There
will be a flyer on the Mountain Stream website at some point in the future. But again, if you want to save the date, it's December 29th through January 8th. And if you want to email me, you